He thought it was just another evening at home, a quiet night in his own house, the place he had worked his whole life to build. But then the knock came. 3 men in uniform stood at his door, claiming authority they didn't have, demanding he leave the home that was rightfully his. Their voices were loud, their presence intimidating, their intentions clear. What started as an ordinary night quickly spiraled into a nightmare of lies, power, and racial injustice. But what no one expected was who would arrive to stand by his side. Marcus Johnson wasn't a man who liked trouble. A Navy veteran turned small business owner, he had worked tirelessly for years to buy the modest suburban home where he now lived. To him, it was more than just a house. It was a symbol of every sacrifice, every long night, every promise he had made to himself and his family. The neighborhood looked peaceful on the outside, with trimmed lawns and friendly smiles in passing, but beneath the surface, not everyone welcomed him the same way. From the very first week, Marcus noticed the glances. Cars that slowed down as they passed his driveway. Neighbors who waved at others, but avoided meeting his eyes. And then came the letters, anonymous notes stuffed into his mailbox, citing fake violations and invented HOA rules that didn't exist. He tried to ignore them at first, brushing it off as petty harassment, but something about it felt more organized, more deliberate. Still, Marcus wasn't the kind of man to back down. He had faced real battles in his life, and he wasn't about to let whispers and empty threats drive him away from what he had earned. Yet, deep down, he sensed the storm brewing. The so-called Homeowners Association seemed determined to break him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't acting alone. It all came to a head one late afternoon, when the knock at his door changed everything. The knock at the door wasn't ordinary. It was loud, deliberate, more like a demand than a request. Marcus opened it to find 2 men standing tall on his porch. They wore dark uniforms, badges glinting in the fading sunlight, their arms crossed with a practiced air of authority. But Marcus immediately noticed what didn't add up. Their patches weren't official. Their belts carried no radios. Their presence felt more like theater than law enforcement. One of them spoke first, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Mr. Johnson, you're in violation of multiple HOA rules. You're going to have to vacate this property." Marcus raised an eyebrow. He knew his rights. He knew the HOA didn't even employ officers, let alone have the authority to evict anyone. But the men didn't stop there. They handed him a fake document, complete with stamps and signatures, that looked almost convincing, almost. "You've got 48 hours to comply," they said, before turning sharply and striding back toward a black SUV parked at the curb. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, paper in hand, his heart pounding. It wasn't fear he felt, it was fury. These weren't just nosy neighbors. This was a coordinated attempt to scare him out of his own home. He thought about calling the police, but he knew all too well how unpredictable that could turn. What if they sided with imposters? What if they dismissed his claims entirely? The following days only escalated the intimidation. Cars idled outside his house at night, their headlights shining directly into his windows. Anonymous phone calls rang through at odd hours, the silence on the other end more chilling than words. Neighbors whispered on sidewalks, shaking their heads as though Marcus had done something wrong. The pressure was suffocating, but Marcus refused to bend. He began documenting everything: license plates, fake notices, recordings of the late-night harassment. His military discipline kicked in. He wasn't just defending his home anymore. He was preparing for battle. Then came the breaking point. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of orange and red, Marcus returned home to find a group of the so-called HOA officers gathered at the end of his driveway. This time, they weren't alone. More men in similar fake uniforms lingered nearby, their body language aggressive, their smirks full of malice. Marcus knew the confrontation he had been preparing for was finally here. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that he wasn't going to face it alone. The air on that quiet suburban street seemed to thicken, every second stretching longer than the last. The so-called HOA officers had escalated their performance, shouting commands, circling him like they owned not just the neighborhood, but him. Their voices dripped with authority they didn't have, each word designed to break him down, to make him small. Neighbors peeked through blinds, some recording on their phones, others too afraid to step outside. It was intimidation at its rawest form, until the roar of engines shattered the charade. From the edge of the street, 6 figures appeared, broad-shouldered, disciplined, moving with precision. They weren't police. They weren't bystanders. They were Navy SEALs, brothers in arms, men who owed him their lives. Their boots hit the pavement in unison, their presence undeniable. The fake cops froze mid-command, their arrogance draining in an instant as real authority took over. The SEALs didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. Their silence was louder than any threat. One stepped forward, eyes locked on the imposters, and the message was clear. This game was over. The homeowner, once cornered, now stood taller, his badge glinting in the fading light, not as a prop, but as truth. And for the first time that day, the power had shifted. The so-called HOA enforcers had no choice but to back away, their bravado crumbling under the weight of real authority. Neighbors who had once watched in silence now stepped outside, their whispers turning into gasps as the truth unfolded. The man they tried to strip of dignity wasn't just a homeowner. He was a protector, a leader, someone who had earned the respect of warriors who showed up when it mattered most. The fake cops disappeared as quickly as they came, leaving behind only shame and silence. But for the man at the center of it all, the sting of the moment would last. Because what happened wasn't just about property lines or HOA rules. It was about something deeper, something uglier. It was about being judged for the color of his skin before the content of his character. And though he had stood tall, the question remained. How many others didn't get the chance to? That's why stories like this matter. They force us to look at the world around us, to confront the injustice we'd rather pretend doesn't exist. And if you believe these stories need to be told, if you want more people to understand the weight of these moments, then I need your help. Hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that shine a light on the truth. Because the more voices that join in, the harder it is for the world to ignore. So I leave you with this. When the next injustice unfolds in plain sight, will we turn away? Or will we stand up together?